Hello. Hello, my name is Ted. All right, today I'm kind of excited about this one. When I was young, I taught myself Hebrew. And that is true. But there's something deceptive about that. Let me explain. I taught myself biblical Hebrew. That sounds fascinating to many people. It sounds arrogant to others. But let me now explain to you the truth of this, because even though everything I said so far is true, it is misleading. I taught myself Hebrew. I went through a massive book on biblical Hebrew. But today, it's terrible. And even at the time, at the height of my understanding and reading Hebrew, I actually tried to memorize the book of Genesis in Hebrew. I got to verse 2 and quit. All right? Some things don't work out. But even then, at the height of my knowledge and understanding of Hebrew, even after a few years of working at this on my own, I probably would not have passed a test to get a PhD, which demanded knowledge in biblical Hebrew. So, what I'm saying is both true but misleading. There are people out there, if you'll watch videos, and you'll look these up on YouTube, you will find videos of people who pretend to be Navy SEALs. They wear the uniform. They've been in the Navy, but in reality, they were never SEALs, but they pretend to be Navy SEALs. And real Navy SEALs like to chase after these people and expose them, and publicly expose them. Brian Simmons basically translated scriptures, the New Testament and a couple of books of the Old Testament, and he has a doctorate. Like so many in the New Apostolic Reformation, he is like that Navy SEAL, parading himself to be somebody that he is not. He went to Wagner University and got his PhD studying prayer. Let me explain a little bit about these universities. I admit that I taught at one of these. Before I taught at legitimate universities, I taught at one of these in my area. I didn't know anything about it. It was back in 2000, back in kind of the beginning of all these universities popping up in charismatic churches. And I taught at one of those. I don't remember how I got in there. I don't remember talking to the pastor to get in there. I just remember vaguely one day sitting with the students, and I put it on one resume and never put it on any resume since then. I felt like it was pretty much a Bible study and not really a subject where students have to really learn and dig into the Word of God. So I'm not impressed with these types of schools. They don't live up to the standards of the types of schools that are accredited, and Wagner University is not accredited. And you will find many of these charismatic schools are accredited, but if you look into their accreditation, they are not legitimately accredited. They're accredited by their own people. These are the types of doctorates that will get a person fired if the job realizes the type of doctorate they have. It is the kind of doctorate that Joyce Myers will need to drop from her name once the state finds out where she got her doctorate from. It is the kind of doctorate that people lose their jobs. It is the kind of doctorate that people will deny they have once it's found out where they got that doctorate from. That is the type of doctorate you will get at Wagner University. And that is the kind of doctorate that Simmons has, the translator of this new Bible, marking the passion of God towards us. John Weaver writes about the New Apostolic Reformation, and one of the comments he made is the New Apostolic Reformation is dumbing down. He sees Wagner, who is kind of the father, I will call him the father, if he hasn't been stated already as the father of the NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation. I will basically say he is the father of it. He borrowed from a lot of different groups and really did a lot of studying in the different charismatic movements throughout the world and realized something was happening in his day. And he basically went from third wave, another something he coined, from third wave to New Apostolic Reformation in the 1990s, and believes that we are on the dawn of a fantastic return of Jesus Christ into this world after we take over the world. The New Apostolic Reformation. John Weaver, he claims that they are dumbing down. He believes Wagner and Kraft, these were teachers of mine at Fuller Seminary. These people were intelligent. They were brilliant. They had fantastic education, but they're dumbing down. And the people who are resulting from the kinds of schools that are coming out of Wagner University and so many other charismatic churches are dumbing down the people. They are openly anti-intellectual. Brian Simmons has his PhD from Peter Wagner's school. As I mentioned, I studied under Peter Wagner for one class, and after that one class, I wanted nothing more to do with him. Go into other classes with Charles Kraft, who is likewise one who helped Peter Wagner get some of this stuff going with the NAR. And I regret to say that because I liked Charles Kraft. Charles Kraft did not get into this stuff when I was at the school. He focused on anthropology and culture, and those are the types of classes I took with him, and I really, really liked Charles Kraft a lot. I have read about, unfortunately, his work in the NAR and helping the NAR to get going with C. Peter Wagner, and I'm disappointed in that whole situation. Back to Simmons. God spoke to him. When people start saying, God told me this, God told me that, I have seen so much abuse and so much garbage when people say that. And I'm going to say this also, in his case, if you want to dig in, look up Brian Simmons, look up this Bible, how it came to be, and you will find lots of this. God told me this, God told me that. God told me there's another chapter for John. God told me that there's stuff in here that nobody gets. I get. It's Gnostic stuff relived. If you don't know what the Gnosticism is, it's back in the early centuries after Jesus, a group of Christians who had knowledge nobody else did, and it was condemned as heretical. Now, Simmons implies a lot that he's an expert in several languages, in Biblical Greek, Biblical Hebrew, and in Aramaic. I believe strongly that this is that Navy SEALs kind of thing. He's putting on a jacket and saying, look at me. I know all these things, therefore I'm qualified to translate a whole new Bible. And I say, I don't think he is this qualified. He has helped translate. He helped translate into a new language in Panama. Great. So he has new tribes of missionary training in translating the Bible. I also have that kind of training from Fuller Seminary. So I know the type of translation that he is using, and I understand what he's trying to do. but the direction he's taking it, I think, is wrong. And I'm going to get into that. He believes that the Aramaic was the best language for interpreting the Bible, for translating the Bible. Because the Aramaic, in his words, are more of a love language, a passionate language, than the heady knowledge of the Greek language. That right there is a bit of a farce. And I'm not going to go there too far because I don't have the qualifications in Aramaic to be able to say that. And he uses Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic. I believe the Aramaic version he is using comes from 5th century. In other words, 450 years after Jesus at least. 5th century. And it is a version possibly and probably translated from the Greek. In other words, most scholars would say it is the Greek language which is as close as we're going to get to what Jesus said, not the Aramaic. Now, let me get in a little bit about this. Jesus spoke in Aramaic. His disciples understood and spoke in Aramaic. His whole country at that time spoke Aramaic. It was their language at the time. It's kind of close to Hebrew. The scholars of his day knew Hebrew, but most people spoke Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic. And I believe that many of the traditions and many of the stories of Jesus passed down from generation to generation, at least in the first generation, through Aramaic language. But it was passed down orally. In other words, people spoke it. People told the stories. And it wasn't until Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John came along and began to translate those into Greek. Did they beforehand translate into Aramaic? Some would say yes, but most people would say no. Most people say the first language the Bible was written in is Greek, even though it is based on Aramaic oral tradition. That is most likely the scenario. And after the Greek was put down, then the Aramaic was written. It was translated from Aramaic into Greek, that's where it was written, and from Greek back into Aramaic, and that is the version we're going to see 400 years later. Does it matter? Probably not. I don't care. It doesn't really matter. What we're going to see he's doing with the Bible is a travesty. Now, for Brian, for his translation, he wants to express God's fiery passion and love for us. He wants to reveal the mysteries of God's love language. He wants to, like the Gnostics of old, give us a deeper understanding of God than we have in our Bibles that we read day after day. He wants to give us a deeper understanding of the promises of God and a deeper understanding of God himself than we get through the translations of the Bibles we have today. Now let's get into a little bit of translation of why this bothers me. First of all, in his translation, he removes extremes. Jesus sometimes spoke extremes. And one of those would be the first will be last and the last will be first. For some reason, he didn't like that, so he says the first will find themselves last, and those who are willing to be last, those who are willing to be last will find themselves to be first. He's taking away the extreme that Jesus gave us. Now, I don't care how you interpret the extreme, but there is an extreme in the original. In Luke 6:24, where it says, "Woe to you who are rich, for you have received your comfort." That's an extreme. And the book of Luke gets much more into this. We will see people who cannot give up their wealth, who are denied the kingdom. We will see in the parable of Lazarus that a wealthy man does not make it into eternal life. he is condemned for eternity, whereby the poor man, on the basis of his poverty, is reached into Abraham's bosom, the closest place to the best of the best of what eternity was all about. And this follows through in the book of Luke over and over again. In the end, the rich man cannot give up his wealth. One does give up a major portion of his wealth, and because he does, he finds the kingdom of God. Thus, we see throughout the book of Luke, Jesus meant to say, woe be to you who are rich, blessed are the poor. Luke said that. If you don't like it, deal with it. And this is how it is translated. What sorrows await those who are rich in this life only. He's protecting his buddies in the new Apostolic Reformation who are very wealthy, making money from people who are trying to buy their healing. He reflects the new Apostolic Reformation in its anti-intellectualism. In Matthew 20:18, he says, listen to me. This is Jesus talking. We're on our way to Jerusalem. I need to remind you that the Son of Man will be handed over to the religious leaders and scholars. There is an anti-intellectualism which dominates in the NAR. I've seen it in many of my comments, and I've heard it from people who are associated with the charismatic movement. Finally, I want to get into the Song of Songs. This, above all, shows his template, what he wants to say throughout the entire scriptures. And it is downright creepy, to say the least. Now, the Song of Songs, because people have a hard time dealing with the Song of Songs, you're dealing with a lot of physical, she looks awesome. I love her teeth. I love her eyes. I love her breasts. I love her thighs. She has great legs. She has all her teeth in her. So this is typical. And she talks about him. Oh, he's so cool. He's so powerful, all this kind of stuff. And that's the kind of language we're talking about in the Song of Songs. It's a love song dealing with a man and a woman. Now, some commentators, people like Matthew Henry, saw that, accepted it, but they said this is symbolic of Christ and the church. Simmons takes this a step further. This is Christ and the church, and thus he says such things as, let him smother me with kisses. Fine, good translation. The Spirit kiss divine. All right, immediately I'm creeped out. So God is giving me a spirit kiss. This is kind of erotic poetry, loving me erotically by kissing me with his mouth. I just don't think it's appropriate. In the next verse, your love is better than wine. That's how most would translate this. God's lovers, he says, will be drunk with love. Wait a minute, that's us. God's lovers will be drunk with love. I think this refers to being drunk in the Spirit, which in itself I think is absurd. And a human, fleshly thing, not a godly thing in worship. Whenever he deals with breasts, he translates in such terms as your pure faith and love rest over your heart as you nurture those who are infants. The translation is absurd, it's outrageous, and it makes God our erotic lover. And, if it were just this book, I'd say toss it out, redo it. But this kind of permeates through all of it. God is this passionate lover of human beings, of us. But as a mature adult in the faith, this is absurd. In chapter 1, verse 6, most translations will rightly say that this woman is dark-skinned. And she says it's because I have been taking care of the flock. My parents made me go out and take care of the flock. So I'm dark-skinned. Some would even say that she was Ethiopian, because in those days they did consider and believe that Ethiopians were so black because of the sun. He says this dark skin, he interprets and he translates dark and sinful ways. Song of Songs did not say she was sinful and dark in that respect. And he'll make comments below about how that's appropriate, but it is not appropriate. She was not sinful. She had dark skin. In chapter 5, twice he says, Jesus talking to us, because he can't see this as a man talking to a woman, Jesus talking to us calls us his equal. Once again, we're delving into NAR teaching, where we're equal with God. Where else do we see that equality with God in the Bible? I think it comes from Isaiah 14, where Satan wants to rise up to the throne of God and be equal with him. This is dangerous territory. We are not equal to God. We will never be equal to God. The Bible in one or two places calls us gods, but we are not equal to God. We're not equal to Jesus. He's not just the first of many of his brothers and sisters who are equal to him. This is blasphemy. All right. I'm going to read to you a couple of things from chapter 7, simply because chapter 7 is kind of probably the most erotic place. It talks about, and most versions will be very faithful to this. Even a version called the Child's, what is this called? It's the Children's Bible. Remains very faithful to this, even though it is erotic. It talks about a woman and her stature being like a palm tree, and her breasts being like clusters in that palm tree. And he says, I'm going to climb up that palm tree, and it depends upon the version. Some will say, grab those clusters. Others will say, grab the boughs. Either way, we're dealing with something that is getting a little PG-13 here, okay? And even a children's Bible can accept that. Here's how he translates it. You stand in victory above the rest, stately and secure as you share with me your vineyard of love. Okay, this is God talking to us. Now I decree, I will ascend and arise. I'll take hold of you with my power, possessing every part of my fruitful vine, my fruitful bride. Your love I will drink as wine, and your words will be mine. When I first started this, I thought, what should I call this version? At first I thought, maybe Play School version, the Play School version. And then I thought, no, I didn't like that. Tickle Me Elmo version, because it's so cute. But eventually, the more I got to know it, I'm just going to call it the creepy version. It is the NAR Bible. It oozes experience and passion to the neglect of something God gave us. A brain to think, to challenge, to look deeper than the surface. It takes liberties with adding to and removing from and changing text to fit the fantasies that Simmons has with Jesus. I would not suggest it for anybody, not even for a new Christian. There are so many English Bibles out there, so many that are far more faithful to the text, that are just as easy reading. Don't get deceived and taken down this passionate road because you are a passionate kind of person. I get it. Some people are very passionate. Don't fall into this because too much is changed. Too much is denied. Too much is completely taken out of this and added to it to be faithful to what God is really trying to say to his church. This is Ted. Have a good day. See you next week.